On March 30th, 1911, the greatest spectacle in racing, the very first Indianapolis 500, is held at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, where it would get the nickname of the Brickyard. Here's a story behind one of the greatest races that is still held to this day, today on Daily Sports History. Welcome to Daily Sports History. My name is Ethan Reese, and I'll be your guide to a rapid deep dive into sports history every day. And today's trivia question to look out for is, how many bricks was originally on the track for the very first Indianapolis 500? Now, in the early 1900s, the automobile was a booming industry in the United States. And it was only in 1893 in Illinois when the first gasoline automobile was built on U.S. soil. And in a few decades after that, company after company was started for the automobile. You had big companies like the Ford Motor Company and many other smaller companies popping up all over the country. Detroit became the largest automobile manufacturer in the United States. But by 1910, Indianapolis was number 2 in the country, having car companies such as Cole, National, Overland, Stutz, and Duesenberg all around the city limits. But despite having so many automobile companies around, Indiana had not developed its roads very well, as this was such a new technology, and many of the manufacturers wanted a way to test their automobiles to increase their capabilities. So local businessman Carl G. Fisher got with other businesses around the town, with a few other businessmen around the town, for a great idea to build a huge motor parkway, which would have long straightaways and gradual turns to allow all the automobiles they were making in the area to reach their fullest potential. It would be a private testing location, but also could be used for competitive races to showcase their automobiles to the general public. And this all happened in 1906. And they started to look for multiple places where they could buy land near the city. They looked all over Indiana, and just so happened about 15 minutes from the middle of Indianapolis, and they wanted to make a large track, 3 to 5 miles, which was more than the traditional ovals that were at fairgrounds that were only a mile long. In the autumn of 1906, Fisher and his friends went for a ride around Indianapolis, and just 5 miles northwest of the city in the countryside, they found a large strip of land of 80 acres that was for sale. They quickly bought up the land and put a plan together to start building. They originally wanted a 5-mile oval, but they modified it down to 3 miles with a 2-mile road course inside that could create a 5-mile lap. And they contacted an engineer to put this together, and he suggested that they actually go to 2.5 miles because they wouldn't have enough space on the land to have a 3-mile track and a grandstand. So they changed course because they wanted to make sure they could have stands for the everyday people to come watch the greatest race course in the world. So after they get the facility, they get the track built. In 1909, they officially start their first season with a tar-coated gravel track called Thyroid, which turned out to be a disaster for the tires and racers alike. Tires blew on it, and the debris was flying everywhere, and it created huge potholes and ended up killing a driver after his car went airborne and flew 80 feet and killed 2 spectators. So they changed the surface in 1910 to brick, and they used 3.2 million bricks that each weighed 10 pounds and gave the nickname to the track the Brickyard. And they raced multiple races on this track throughout this time. They would start on Memorial Day weekend and go all the way to Labor Day weekend throughout the whole summer and run multiple races all under 200 miles. And this was very common back in the day. But they noticed on Memorial Day, that first race, they got huge attendance, and it dwindled down throughout the summer, and they would get a little bump at Labor Day for the other holiday. So they decided that to make it just one giant race on Memorial Day when they got the biggest turnout. But they had to decide how big to make it. There was already the 24-hour contest in Le Mans, and they thought that would be intriguing and they could give a large purse, and that'd be great for the auto manufacturers to test their cars. But it's not a great spectator event, as many people can't just stay and watch a race for 24 hours. So they wanted to find the right balance, and they settled on 500 miles, and they set it up to be on May 30th, 1911. So all the manufacturers were coming out from all over the country. There were ones from Massachusetts, New York, Buffalo, Cleveland, Ohio, all making the trek out to Indianapolis in May to be part of this inaugural Indy 500. And there was 46 total entries, including some from Europe. And they added up that the total purse for the winner would be $27,050. And to qualify for the race, the driver had to sustain an average of 75 miles an hour. And of those 46 entries, only 40 qualified. Then came, after all this qualifying and inspections of the cars, the race was ready to begin in front of 90,000 fans and 200 timing judges hired to make sure that that they had an accurate count of the race. And at 10 a.m., the race officially began. And what was unique about this race is it was one of the few races to ever start with a rolling start. They would have cars set up 5 wide and use a pace car to get them all rolling to begin the race and start at almost full speed. And at first, Johnny Akins, driving a national car, took the lead for the first 4 laps. Then Spencer Weishart took over in the Mercedes, but soon would be overtaken by a Fiat driven by David Bruce Brown, who would continue to lead for most of the first half of the race. But sadly, on lap 12 was when tragedy struck. Back in this time, many of these long races had 2 people riding in the cars. They were designed that way. One would be the driver, and the other would be a mechanic who would look after the engine and the car's well-being, such as the tires and the oil, but would also be a lookout, letting the driver know if someone was coming up on a side, as they didn't have mirrors attached to the cars back then, except for one driver, who we will get to later. On lap 12, Sam Dickerson, who was the riding mechanic for Arthur Greiner, was the first person ever killed during the Indianapolis 500. And sadly, there have been more killed at this racing event. One of the front wheels came off of Greiner's car and caused him to lose control, and both men were thrown from the car. While Greiner escaped with a broken arm, Dickerson flew 15 feet from the car into the fence and was pronounced dead when the doctors arrived to check on him. The race continued despite the sadness that just happened. And something unusual happened about halfway through the race. A driver named Ray Haroon, who was an engineer of the Marmon Wasp company and had won races previously at this speedway, finally took the lead. And there was something unique about Ray, as he was not driving with a mechanic. He was the only one in the car. And he was driving the first car that was ever recorded to have a rear view mirror. It was a unique mirror, as it sat actually just a little bit above him in front of the car. He didn't have side mirrors, just that one rear view mirror. And his car was known as the Marmon Wasp, as it had a distinct point on the back of it, similar to a wasp tail. And the reason that it was even weirder that he was taking the lead is he was averaging only 74 miles an hour, which wouldn't even qualify to make the race. But he continued that speed for one reason, that he knew that others did not, as many had not driven on bricks this long. He knew that tires could not handle bricks at that speed. So he drove slower and was a tortoise against all the hares. And what this caused was he only had to change 4 total tires the entire race, as many of the other competitors either crashed, as there was 8 wrecks throughout the race, or had to take multiple pit stops. He only took 4 the entire race, as everyone else averaged 11 pit stops. And that time difference is what really led him to win the race. It wasn't some photo finish, as he won the race, but it was also a contested win. He won the race, he was officially given the win, except they did review it, as there was a lot of confusion. Even with those 200 timekeepers, keeping track of 40 drivers through 500 miles is a lot to make sure that we got every lap right. As another driver named Mulford thought he had actually lapped Ray, which he may have at some point earlier in the race. But Ray continued that slow and steady approach, which meant he probably passed him while he was in the pits. Eventually, no protest was filed. He just was upset at the time, and both claimed that Ray was the official first winner of the race and an innovator for racing, as after this, the rearview mirror became a staple of not only racing, but cars that we even drive to this day. So when you look up at your mirror, you can remember Ray. And remember that sometimes taking your time to think things out and have a great plan can be better than just jumping in and going as fast as you can. So whichever one you like may be right, but try to make a good plan for yourself. And if you want a topic to be told on Daily Sports History, all you have to do is leave us a review wherever you're listening or send us an email at Daily Sports History, and we will gladly get that done for you because we want you to be a great sports historian just like us, and come back tomorrow for more Daily Sports History. And did you catch the answer to today's trivia question? How many bricks were used to pave the original Indy 500? 3.2 million bricks weighing 10 pounds each.